Signalgate, Europe bashing. Donald Trump is aiming to reshape the country's voting laws. A lot to talk about with former ambassador and Donald Trump's security advisor during his first term, John Bolton. Ambassador, thanks for being back on our program.
Glad to be back with you.
Every crisis communication expert basically says if you make a mistake, commit to it, fire the people responsible and move on. Do you think, as you know Donald Trump, do you think he's able to commit to a mistake and maybe fire some people in the so-called signal gate?
Donald Trump has never made a mistake. His subordinates may make mistakes, but he doesn't. I think at this point, he doesn't believe that he is affected politically by the Signal chat group issue, but I think he's watching it very closely, and I don't think we know how this is going to turn out. But I do believe until Trump feels political pressure on him, that there's not likely to be any disciplinary action, nobody getting fired, and certainly no investigation by the Justice Department.
Should there be a criminal investigation?
You know, I don't think we know enough at this point, but it certainly indicates to me that there has to be more than the denials that we've heard from the administration. I think many people in Congress, now including particularly Republicans, are upset by this. The chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Senator Wicker of Mississippi, said today that he believed that the information in the chat was classified. Pretty serious statement for the Armed Services Committee chairman to make. He didn't recommend an outcome, but that's a significant step forward. And I think he is speaking for a lot of Republicans who otherwise would not want to go public.
Do you think it was kind of a security mistake, you personally?
Absolutely. It's inconceivable to me that you would use a non-secure channel. The fact that Signal is encrypted doesn't mean a thing. Encryption can be broken. That's one reason we have the National Security Agency with hundreds, maybe thousands of people and very big computers trying to decrypt adversaries' messages. And I'm sure they're trying to do that to us. It's why the U.S. government has spent billions of dollars over decades to form the world's most secure telecommunications system. Why not just pick up the phone on your desk and use it?
How serious is this issue for you? I mean, you know the world, you have dealt with many difficult countries, let's put it that way. How serious is this so-called signal gate?
Well, I think there's a lot of material that was disclosed. Nobody's denied that what the Atlantic magazine has published is accurate. The fact is, much of this discussion was before military action began, so the mere fact that the U.S. was considering a major increase in its efforts against the Houthis in Yemen is important to them. We're lucky that nobody was able to get hold of this information and put American service members in danger. But even what they can see after the fact tells our adversaries a lot about how we do things. It does reveal intelligence sources and methods. When Mike Waltz said, well, we saw the terrorist target walking into a building with his girlfriend and that building is now collapsed. We didn't get that observation by watching Houthi television or reading Houthi newspapers. We got it in other ways. So there's a lot here that's very disturbing. And again, to me, I just couldn't understand and have yet to hear an explanation why everybody on that chat didn't simply use the incredible facilities that they have. Doesn't matter what you say, whether you're talking about what you've read in the newspaper or what you've seen through intelligence sources on the government system. It's as protected as it's ever going to be, and nobody can be accused of endangering classified information.
Do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg and there will be more incidences like that coming out?
Well, we don't know whether this question was asked in the closed sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday. The testimony by the heads of the major intelligence agencies to Congress was part of what's called the annual threat assessment report. Didn't have anything to do with Signal, but it was an interesting opportunity. We saw the public sessions, but as with every year that goes by, there's a closed session in a secure conference room in Congress for them to hear privately from the heads of the intelligence agencies. And they should have been asking, have there been prior incidents of the use of Signal or any other non-governmental channel to discuss sensitive information before this? The answer to that is yes. Then I think there's obviously a much more serious problem.
What did you think, Ambassador Bolton, when you learned that the information, like telephone numbers from Secretary of Defense Hegseth and information about other accounts he has, were so easily available on the internet? A German newspaper broke that yesterday.
Well, it's very disturbing. It shows when things start to go wrong, they tend to get worse. It's possible somebody had hacked into his system and extracted that information and put it out at that time. Could have been a foreign intelligence services. I don't know. It could have been his own carelessness. But I think even though Trump himself at this point doesn't feel any political pain, I think both Hegseth and Waltz could be hanging by a thread, because at some point Trump says to himself, I'm going to defend these people because the Democrats and the press are after them. I'm certainly not going to do anything until some time has passed before making a decision. But it could be that Trump, who always has his own personal situation at the center of his calculations, says these people are causing me too much trouble, even if we escaped a public debacle.
Besides the military details we learned in this chat, we also heard how JD Vance, the Vice President, is talking about Europe. What do you make of that?
Well, it didn't surprise me. I understand some people in Europe are surprised that he's saying one thing in public and amazingly saying the same thing in private. When he campaigned for the Senate in 22 in Ohio, which has a substantial population of Ukrainian descendants, Ukrainian Americans, he said even back then, I don't care what happens to Ukraine. And he was elected anyway. So I think that is what he thinks. His mistake was incredibly not only disagreeing with Trump in this communication, but basically saying Trump didn't understand what he was doing. So he now has his own problems with Trump. But really, everybody on that chat group bears responsibility for at some point not saying, what are we doing in Signal? Why don't we get on the government classified system, which apparently none of them did.
You just said it. I mean, JD Vance so openly criticizing Donald Trump. Doesn't Donald Trump has to react to that?
Well, I think it all goes into his little black book, and he doesn't keep a little book, but he keeps it in his head. And I think Vance is going to have to consider steps to explain why he was making those comments. I don't think we're going to see that publicly anytime soon, but this is something that it's pretty hard for Trump to ignore.
Talking about Europe, Mr. Bolton, I mean, Europeans vow to stand by Ukraine, but they disagree over the force proposal. We just learned that today. What do you make of that? Is Europe on the right path?
Well, from what I've seen from the public reports of the deliberations in Europe, there was never real clarity on the issue of what the mission of the force would be. People talked about boots on the ground and so on, but there's a very important distinction in peacekeeping whether the mission of the force is to enforce the ceasefire, that is to say, to be prepared to use military force to counter a breach of the ceasefire, which implies rules of engagement that allow the use of force for that, or, as is more typical in UN peacekeeping operations, whether the mission of the force is to observe the ceasefire, and where force is allowed the peacekeepers only in self-defense. These are hugely different modes. Obviously, in the first case, you're talking about potentially engaging in hostile military action to prevent a breach of the ceasefire. That could mean NATO troops firing on Russian troops, as opposed to UN-style peacekeeping, where you just kind of wave and watch the violation take place. The fact that there was no agreement on that basic issue leads me to worry that there were a lot of other factors that are necessary to decide upon in peacekeeping were not considered fully either.
So, putting that into consideration, Europe seems to be far away from being able to act like without the support of the United States in self-defense.
Let me put it this way. During the Cold War, it was a key priority of the Soviet Union to break the Western alliance. we may be on the verge of doing that by ourselves right now. And I think we've got to be very careful. There's no doubt Trump is causing damage. And I have to say, there's no doubt he's likely to continue to cause damage. But if Europe overreacts, and I'm very worried some of that has already occurred, it gives Trump a permission slip to withdraw from Europe and say, look, if the Europeans don't want us, fine. Call us the next time you're invaded by an authoritarian state and do let us know how it turns out. We've got to think beyond Trump's term. Everybody on both sides of the Atlantic has got to grit their teeth and try and mitigate the damage that's going to be done here so we can make it easier and faster to repair the damage once Trump's term ends.
How could this look like for our next very likely German Chancellor when it comes to the rhetoric regarding the United States?
Well, honestly, I had his comment about German independence in mind. Look, NATO is not a prison camp. If you want out of NATO, if you want us out of NATO, it's easy enough to do. I just think it's a mistake. And I think given the amount of investment Europe would have to do to get the capabilities that the United States has now and the time it will take to put them into place, even if we got a ceasefire in Ukraine tomorrow, Russia could regroup, refit, restock its army in the next couple of years. And without the United States in Europe, it might well decide to go after NATO countries. So, look, it's unpleasant what we're going through. I understand the reaction of European countries. And all I can say is just take a deep breath. Let's stop talking about all this in public. Let's talk about it behind closed doors. Trump will talk about it in public. Turn the volume off on the television set when he comes on, and let's find a way through this.
There's a lot of concern around the world that the United States maybe already is in a constitutional crisis. When you look at Donald Trump aiming to change the voting laws in the country, do you share this sentiment?
Look, much of that executive order has no force or effect at all. These are state and local issues. And if the federal government does get involved in voting, which it has done from time to time, it has to be by act of Congress. So this is Trump typically getting publicity for something that he thinks is politically useful to him. By the time the litigation catches up with it, it could be 2 years from now. So again, there may be damage done, but this is not going anywhere if people think he's going to tell state and local governments how to redo elections. Simply not going to happen.
So you don't share this fear that the United States is at least at the brink of a constitutional crisis?
You know, the Constitution's been around for 230 years. It is the world's oldest continuously enforced written constitution. We had a civil war once where millions of Americans were killed, and we survived that. We will survive Donald Trump.
John Bolton, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.